Star Trek's Worf and Captain Burnham share one tragedy in common. Star Trek's Captain Worf, Michael Dorn, and Captain Michael Burnham, Sonequa Martin Green, shared a common tragedy. A prequel to Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek Discovery Season 1 depicts the start of the Klingon Federation War, with flashbacks to the acts of violence that the Klingons perpetrated against citizens of the United Federation of Planets. Tension between the Klingons and Federation would continue to grow through TOS, and a tenuous alliance between the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire was finally sealed with the Khitomer Accords in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. The longest periods of conflict between the Federation and the Klingons in the Star Trek timeline are bookended by the lives of 24th century Worf and 23rd century Michael Burnham. Star Trek: The Next Generation's Lieutenant Commander Worf was the first and to this day only full-blooded Klingon in Starfleet, proving that tensions between the Klingon Empire and Federation had waned during Star Trek's lost era between TOS and TNG. Just as Worf represented an unsteady alliance, Michael Burnham's life in Star Trek Discovery was stained with blood spilled by Klingon hands. Worf and Captain Burnham's common Star Trek tragedy explain the tragedy that struck the early lives of both Worf and Michael Burnham was being orphaned as children and raised by another alien species. After Michael Burnham's parents were killed by Klingons, Michael lived on Vulcan with Amanda Grayson, Mia Kirshner, and Ambassador Sarek, James Frain, Spock's, Ethan Peck parents. After Worf's parents were killed by Romulans on Khitomer, Worf was found in the wreckage and sent to Earth to be raised by Sergei, Theodore Bickel, and Helena Rosenko, Georgia Brown. Instead of Burnham joining the Vulcan Expeditionary Group or Worf becoming a Klingon warrior, both Star Trek characters joined Starfleet. Struggling as outsiders, Burnham and Worf both overcompensated for perceived shortcomings by leaning into their non-human influences. Michael internalized Vulcan ways as superior and held onto that belief well into her adulthood. Of Burnham's mutiny on the USS Shenzhou was informed by applying a Vulcan filter to her understanding of Klingon culture. Being raised by humans made Worf double down on what it meant to be Klingon, but in a performative, academic way, until Worf changed in Star Trek Deep Space Nine and bonded with other Klingons. Exposed to Starfleet's cultural diversity, Worf and Burnham embraced their upbringing more easily. Burnham and Worf became unique Star Trek captains. Michael, Burnham, and Worf bring unique perspectives to their leadership as Star Trek captains. Thanks to their upbringings among different species, both Burnham and Worf are uniquely qualified to negotiate between the Federation and Vulcans or Klingons, respectively. Burnham's particularly Vulcan approach to problems didn't mesh with Starfleet protocol early on, but became an asset when renegotiating Nevar's participation in the 32nd Century Federation in Star Trek Discovery Season 4. With an individual philosophy drawing from Klingon and Federation values, Star Trek Picard's Captain Worf is a valuable independent contractor with ties to the Klingon Empire and to Starfleet. Michael Burnham and Worf are also unique Star Trek captains who reflect how Star Trek's commitment to diversity continues to grow. From a production standpoint, Michael Burnham is the first black female captain to lead her own Star Trek series. Worf, being Starfleet's first Klingon captain, represents Worf's uniqueness both in and out of the universe, since both viewers and Federation citizens have long known Klingons to be enemies rather than allies of the Federation. Worf and Burnham's backgrounds as interspecies adoptees make them better characters with a wider understanding of the Star Trek universe. In the vast, intricate universe of Star Trek, characters are shaped by their pasts, their experiences, and the tragedies they endure. Some characters are defined by their resilience in the face of hardship, and two of the most notable examples of this are Worf and Captain Michael Burnham. While their paths diverge across time, species, and personal goals, they share a singular, profound tragedy that binds them together in ways they may never fully realize: the loss of their families. Worf, the stalwart Klingon officer who served on the Enterprise and later the Defiant, was born to two cultures at odds, Klingon and human. His tragic journey began when his family was killed during the Klingon Civil War. As a child, he was found by human parents who raised him on Earth. Despite being adopted and loved by his human family, Worf was always marked by his heritage. caught between his Klingon warrior ideals and the compassion of his human upbringing. The loss of his birth parents, compounded by the struggles of cultural identity and personal isolation, became the crucible that shaped Worf into the hardened, stoic officer he would later become. Worf's life is a series of losses. The destruction of the Khitomer colony, the death of his brother Kurn, and the constant emotional turmoil of being a Klingon in a world that often saw him as an outsider. Even within the close-knit Enterprise crew, Worf never truly felt a sense of belonging. While his loyalty and dedication were unquestioned, there was always a lingering sorrow beneath his stern exterior, the absence of his family, his roots. It was this grief, buried deep within him, that often led him to distance himself from others, even those who cared for him. Enter Captain Michael Burnham, whose tragic backstory mirrors Worf's in striking ways. Raised by the Vulcan Sarek and his human wife Amanda, Burnham was an adopted child in a fractured world. Her mother's death at the hands of a Klingon attack during the Battle of the Binary Stars is where Burnham's tragedy began. However, her loss runs deeper than a mere battle death. Burnham's emotional and ethical development was significantly influenced by the traumatic event. She was directly responsible for the escalation of the war between the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire after her unauthorized act of mutiny. While Burnham was not directly at fault for her mother's death, the guilt of that fateful decision, the destruction of her family, shaped her and haunted her throughout her life. What truly ties Worf and Burnham together is the singular tragedy they both endured. The loss of their families, not just in terms of death, but in terms of displacement, isolation, and the overwhelming sense of being alone in a universe that seemed indifferent to their grief. Burnham, after her mother's death, became estranged from her Vulcan father, Sarek, struggling with her place in a world where she was always in between two cultures, Vulcan logic and human emotion. Her quest for redemption was marked by the painful realization that her actions, whether driven by emotion or logic, could never bring back the family she lost. Worf's story is equally defined by a longing for something lost and irretrievable. His sense of duty to the Klingon Empire was fueled by a need to honor his birth parents and his people. Yet his deep sense of loyalty to Starfleet, combined with his desire to be accepted, placed him in a liminal space between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. He was never truly accepted by either, a constant outsider, haunted by the absence of his family's presence and the cultural connection that could have grounded him. Like Burnham, Worf's emotional vulnerability was often hidden beneath layers of stoicism and duty. Both Worf and Burnham have taken on leadership roles, and both have faced the weight of their pasts in these positions. Worf's journey has often been about reconciling his sense of duty to Starfleet with his identity as a Klingon. Burnham's journey, however, is more focused on redemption and reconciling the mistakes of her past. In this, they share a tragic bond, the need to prove themselves, to earn acceptance, and to show that their family's tragedies have not broken them. Yet, despite the many parallels in their histories, it's clear that the tragedy both Worf and Burnham share has made them stronger in different ways. Worf, through his rigid discipline, became a paragon of the Klingon warrior code, earning the respect of his crew and his people. Burnham, through her growth and introspection, has become a leader who inspires loyalty not through force, but through empathy and intellect. Both have turned their losses into a source of power, albeit in different forms. In many ways, the tragedies of Worf and Burnham had defined them not just as warriors or officers, but as deeply human figures who,